May 14th, 1998, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles, 10:50 p.m. Frank Sinatra lay dying. At 82 years old, the man who sang My Way could barely breathe. His children surrounded the bed, Nancy, Frank Jr., and Tina. His wife Barbara held his hand. The monitors beeped slower, weaker. The end was minutes away. And then, with what little strength remained in that famous voice, Frank Sinatra whispered one word. Not goodbye, not I love you. Just one name. Ava. 45 years after their divorce, after 4 wives, after hundreds of affairs, after building an empire, destroying relationships, and becoming a legend, the last word Frank Sinatra ever spoke was the name of the woman who destroyed him. The woman he never stopped loving. The woman who haunted every song he sang after she left. This is the story of Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra. The greatest love affair in Hollywood history, the most toxic relationship in American popular culture, the romance that inspired his greatest work and nearly ended his life. It's a story of obsession, betrayal, abortion, suicide attempts, and a love so powerful it lasted beyond death itself. Nobody knew Frank Sinatra like Ava Gardner knew Frank Sinatra. She saw the man behind the myth, the insecure boy from Hoboken hiding beneath the swagger, the violent temper, the desperate need for control, the bottomless well of loneliness that no amount of fame could fill. And she loved him anyway. Or maybe she loved him because of it, because Ava Gardner understood destruction. She was born into poverty in North Carolina, raised by tobacco farmers, discovered by accident, transformed into the most beautiful woman in Hollywood. And she never believed a word of it. When Frank and Ava collided in 1949, it was inevitable. 2 people running from themselves, 2 people who couldn't be tamed, 2 people who needed chaos to feel alive. Ava Gardner didn't just break Frank Sinatra's heart. She broke something deeper, something he never got back. And on his deathbed, surrounded by the family he'd built without her, he said her name. Because after everything, all the success, all the money, all the other women, she was still the one. Let me tell you how it happened. Hollywood, 1949. Frank Sinatra was 34 years old, and everything he'd worked for was starting to crumble. The screaming Bobby Soxers from the 1940s had moved on. His record sales were plummeting. MGM was questioning whether he was still bankable. His voice, that instrument he'd perfected through years of obsessive training, was starting to show wear. Too many cigarettes, too many late nights, too much Jack Daniels. But the biggest problem wasn't his career, it was his marriage. Nancy Barbados Sinatra was the girl from Hoboken, his high school sweetheart, the woman who believed in him when he was nobody. They married in 1939 when Frank was just a skinny Italian kid singing with the Harry James Orchestra. She gave him 3 children, Nancy Jr., Frank Jr., and Tina. She stood by him through the lean years, through the war, through his meteoric rise to fame, and Frank thanked her by cheating, constantly, compulsively, with showgirls, starlets, and anyone who showed interest. It wasn't even subtle. Everyone in Hollywood knew. The press knew. Nancy knew. But she stayed, Catholic, loyal, hopeful that Frank would grow up, that fatherhood would change him, that success would satisfy him. It didn't. Because Frank Sinatra wasn't built for satisfaction. He was built for hunger, for wanting what he couldn't have, for needing to prove himself over and over again. The boy from Hoboken who never felt like he belonged, the Italian-American who the establishment treated like a novelty act, the singer who everyone said got lucky. Inside that swagger was a black hole of insecurity, and he tried to fill it with everything: fame, money, power, women. None of it worked. Until Ava Gardner, in 1949, was 27 years old and already a survivor. Born in Grabtown, North Carolina, population 551, on Christmas Eve, 1922. The youngest of 7 children. Her father was a sharecropper. Her mother took in boarders. They lived in a house with no electricity, no running water. Ava picked cotton and tobacco as a child. Poverty wasn't something she visited. It was her entire world. Then her brother-in-law, a photographer in New York, took some pictures of her, sent them to MGM, and in 1941, at 18 years old, Ava Gardner became a contract player in Hollywood. The studio changed everything about her, taught her to walk, to talk, to dress. They capped her teeth, trained her voice, packaged her as the most beautiful woman in the world. And Ava never believed it. Deep down, she was still that poor girl from North Carolina, still waiting for someone to realize she didn't belong. So she did what people do when they don't believe they deserve something. She tried to destroy it before it could be taken away. She married Mickey Rooney in 1942, divorced him a year later, married the bandleader Artie Shaw in 1945, divorced him within a year. Both men were wrong for her. Both marriages were disasters. Ava was running from fame, from expectation, from the crushing burden of being called perfect when she felt like a fraud. By 1949, Ava was drinking heavily, staying out all night, dating bullfighters and billionaires, and anyone dangerous enough to make her feel alive. MGM was worried. They had a major investment in her. They needed her stable. They needed her married to someone respectable. Enter Frank Sinatra. They first met at a party in 1949, though some accounts say they'd seen each other casually before. MGM Studios, a gathering for cast and crew. Frank walked in with Nancy, the dutiful wife, the mother of his children, smiling for the cameras while everyone in the room knew her husband was sleeping with half of Hollywood. And then Frank saw Ava across the room. Years later, Ava would describe that moment to friends. She said she felt it before she saw him. A shift in the air, she called it, like the temperature dropped. Then she turned and there he was, blue eyes locked on her, not the boyish crooner she'd seen in pictures. Something darker, hungrier. Frank didn't look away, didn't pretend, just stared. Nancy tugged his arm. He didn't move. Ava stared back. She knew this type. The charmer, the manipulator, the man who'd sweet-talk you into bed and forget your name by morning. She dated a dozen of them. She wasn't interested, except she couldn't look away either. That's how it started. Not with conversation, not with romance, with recognition. 2 people seeing each other's damage and wanting it. Over the next few weeks, Frank engineered coincidental meetings. He showed up at restaurants where Ava was dining, at clubs where she danced. He sent flowers. He called. He pursued her with the same obsessive focus he brought to everything. Total, unrelenting, overwhelming. Ava resisted. She'd heard the stories. Frank Sinatra had a reputation, a temper, a jealous streak, a wife at home. She didn't need the complication, didn't want the scandal. But Frank was patient. For once in his life, he didn't rush. He listened to her, asked about her childhood, her fears, her dreams. He didn't treat her like the most beautiful woman in the world. He treated her like the scared girl from North Carolina who never felt good enough. And that's what broke her defenses. Not the fame, not the charm, the fact that Frank Sinatra, arrogant, entitled, explosive Frank Sinatra, saw through her. Their first kiss happened in a rainstorm outside a nightclub in Los Angeles. November 1949, they'd been dancing, drinking, laughing. Frank walked her to her car. The rain started. Neither moved to get out of it. Ava later told friends she knew in that moment her life was over. That kissing Frank Sinatra was signing a contract written in blood, that whatever happened next would destroy everything. She kissed him anyway. What followed was chaos. Beautiful, terrible, addictive chaos. Frank stopped pretending. He stopped going home to Nancy. He rented an apartment in West Hollywood where he and Ava could meet. But secret in Hollywood was a myth. Photographers followed them. Gossip columnists tracked their movements. Headlines screamed about Frankie's new flame. Nancy saw the papers, read the rumors. She called Frank, begged him to come home, to think of the children, to remember his vows. Frank hung up. He'd made his choice. By early 1950, Frank and Ava weren't hiding anymore. They were seen together at nightclubs, at prize fights, at Ava's house in the Hollywood Hills. Frank brought his entourage, the varsity, his group of hangers-on who laughed at his jokes and covered for his indiscretions. They'd drink until 4 a.m., play cards, tell stories, and Ava would sit on Frank's lap, cigarette in one hand, whiskey in the other, laughing louder than anyone. She wasn't the polished movie star in those moments. She was raw, real, profane. She cursed like a sailor, told dirty jokes, challenged men to drinking contests. Everything MGM had tried to suppress, Frank unleashed. And he loved it. Loved that she wasn't delicate. Loved that she didn't need him to be gentle. Loved that she matched his intensity. When Frank raged, Ava raged back. When he threw dishes, she threw bottles. When he stormed out, she didn't chase him. She let him go. That drove him crazy. Women didn't leave Frank Sinatra. Frank left them. But Ava had her own life, her own career, her own friends. She didn't exist to serve his ego, and that's why he couldn't quit her. Because for the first time in his life, Frank Sinatra wasn't in control. But the affair came with a cost. Nancy refused to give Frank a divorce. She was Catholic. Divorce was a sin. And beyond religion, she had leverage. The children. Frank adored his kids. Nancy knew it. She played that card ruthlessly. You want to see your children? Come home. Frank was trapped. Ava wouldn't marry him unless he divorced Nancy. Nancy wouldn't divorce him, and the press was eviscerating both of them. Frank's career was already struggling. Now sponsors were dropping him. Radio stations refused to play his records. Ministers called him immoral. Women's groups protested his concerts, and Ava's career suffered too. MGM threatened to drop her contract, called her a homewrecker, demanded she end the relationship. Louis B. Mayer himself, the most powerful man in Hollywood, summoned Ava to his office and told her, "You're throwing your career away for a washed-up has-been." Ava's response, according to witnesses, "Go to hell." That's the thing about Ava Gardner. She didn't care about the rules, didn't care what people thought. She'd grown up with nothing. Fame didn't impress her. Money didn't control her. She did what she wanted, and what she wanted was Frank, even when it was destroying both of them. Their fights were legendary, violent, operatic. Neighbors called the police multiple times. Once, Frank threw a lamp at Ava. She threw it back. Another time, she locked him out of her house. He broke a window to get back in, cut his hand, bled all over her white carpet. They screamed at each other until dawn, then fell into bed together. It was toxic, obsessive, unhealthy, and neither of them could stop. Because underneath the chaos was something neither had ever felt before, being truly seen. Frank's mother, Dolly, was domineering. Nancy was submissive, but Ava was neither. She didn't worship Frank, didn't fear him. She challenged him, matched him, refused to be conquered. And Frank's obsession only grew. He wrote her letters, dozens of them, declaring his love, begging her to wait for him, promising he'd leave Nancy, promising he'd fix everything. But months passed and nothing changed. Nancy wouldn't budge. Frank's career kept spiraling, and Ava was starting to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. Then in February 1950, Nancy finally gave in. She filed for separation, not divorce, but separation. It was enough for Frank. He moved out of the family home, rented a place in Los Angeles, and immediately asked Ava to move in. She refused. She'd waited this long. She wasn't going to be the mistress shacking up with a married man. She wanted marriage, a real commitment, proof that Frank loved her more than his fear of scandal. Frank was furious. After everything he'd sacrificed, his family, his reputation, his career, she still wouldn't fully commit. They fought, broke up, got back together, broke up again. This became their pattern, a cycle of passion and destruction that neither could escape. And through it all, Frank kept singing, kept recording, but now his voice carried something it hadn't before. Pain, real, raw, unfiltered pain. Listen to the recordings from 1950 and 1951. I'm a fool to want you. I could write a book. Nevertheless, every note drips with longing, with regret, with the ache of loving someone who might not love you back the same way. Critics noticed, this wasn't the smooth crooner from the 1940s. This was a man bleeding through a microphone, and it was devastating. Some of his greatest vocal performances came from this period, not despite the suffering, but because of it. Ava Gardner didn't just inspire Frank Sinatra's music, she became his music. Every ballad about lost love, every torch song about heartbreak, every lonely 3 a.m. performance in a half-empty nightclub. That was Ava. But by late 1951, Frank was broke. Columbia Records dropped him, MGM canceled his contract, he owed back taxes, couldn't afford his rent. His voice was shot from stress and drinking, and Nancy was demanding alimony and child support he didn't have. Frank Sinatra, the biggest star of the 1940s, was finished, washed up, yesterday's news. And Ava, MGM was sending her to Africa to film Mogambo with Clark Gable. 3 months on location, in the jungle, far from Frank. He begged her not to go, told her he needed her, that he'd die without her. Ava went anyway, and that's when everything fell apart. The worst was yet to come. November 1952. Ava was in Africa. Frank was in Los Angeles, alone, broke, desperate, and then Ava called with news. She was pregnant. Frank was ecstatic. A child with Ava, proof of their love, a reason to finally get married, a future. But Ava's voice on the phone was cold, distant. She didn't share his joy. "I'm not keeping it," she said. Silence. "What?" "I can't have a baby right now, Frank. I'm filming. My career is finally taking off. I can't." Frank interrupted, begged, pleaded, promised he'd take care of everything, that they'd get married, that he'd be a good father, that this was their chance. But Ava had made up her mind. She'd already had 2 abortions before, one during her marriage to Artie Shaw, one from a brief fling. MGM had arranged them. Quick, quiet, clean, no scandal, no consequences. This would be the same. Frank flew to London, met Ava between filming. They fought for 3 days straight. Frank cried, Ava stayed firm. "I don't want to be pregnant by a man who's still married to someone else," she told him. Frank promised again that he'd divorce Nancy, that he'd fix everything. But Ava had heard it before, too many times. She didn't believe him anymore. On November 23, 1952, Ava Gardner had an abortion in a private London clinic. Frank wasn't there. She forbade it, went alone, came back to the hotel, found Frank waiting. He looked at her and knew it was done, knew she'd killed their child, knew she'd chosen her career over him. And something in Frank Sinatra broke that day, something permanent. He didn't yell, didn't throw things, just looked at Ava with empty eyes and said, "I'll never forgive you for this." Ava said nothing, just poured a drink, lit a cigarette, stared out the window. Years later, she told friends she regretted it. Not the abortion, she never regretted that, but the way it ended things with Frank. The finality of it, the realization that some damage can't be undone. They tried to make it work. Got married anyway, November 7, 1951, before the abortion, at a small ceremony in Philadelphia. Ava wore a simple dress. Frank wore a suit. Axel Stordahl, Frank's arranger, was the best man. The ceremony lasted 10 minutes. It wasn't romantic, it was desperate. Two people clinging to something already dead. Their marriage lasted less than 2 years. They fought constantly. Frank's jealousy was unbearable. He accused Ava of sleeping with every co-star, every director, every man who looked at her. He hired private detectives to follow her, listened in on her phone calls, showed up unannounced on her film sets to check on her. Ava felt suffocated, controlled. She was the freest woman in Hollywood, and Frank was trying to cage her. And Frank, he was drowning. His career was in ruins. His voice was failing. And the one thing he wanted, Ava's complete devotion, she wouldn't give. So he drank, took pills, stopped eating. Friends found him passed out in hotel rooms, on bathroom floors. Once, Ava came home to find Frank unconscious with an empty bottle of sleeping pills on the nightstand. She panicked, called an ambulance. They pumped his stomach, saved his life. When he woke up, Ava was sitting by the bed, crying, not because she almost lost him, because she knew she had to leave. "I can't do this anymore, Frank," she whispered. Frank grabbed her hand. "Don't go. Please, I'll change. You won't," Ava said. "And I won't either. We're killing each other." She was right, but Frank couldn't accept it. In October 1953, Ava filed for divorce. Official, final, over. Everything was falling apart. Frank begged, sent flowers, wrote letters, showed up at her house in the middle of the night. She changed the locks, refused his calls, moved to Spain to get away from him, and Frank Sinatra fell apart completely. After Ava left, Frank did the only thing he knew how to do. He sang, but now every song was about her, every lonely ballad, every torch song about lost love, every 3 a.m. performance in front of a half-empty room. That was Ava. In 1955, Frank recorded an album called In the Wee Small Hours. 16 songs, 16 gut-wrenching, soul-destroying songs about heartbreak, about loss, about loving someone who doesn't love you back. Glad to be unhappy. I get along without you very well. What is this thing called love? Last night when we were young. Critics call it the first concept album, the first time a singer used an entire LP to tell one emotional story. And that story was Ava. Nelson Riddle, the arranger, said Frank was impossible to work with during those sessions. He'd demand take after take, obsess over every note, every breath. He wanted perfection, but more than that, he wanted catharsis. He wanted to bleed through the microphone and make the world feel what he felt. And it worked. In the Wee Small Hours is considered one of the greatest albums in American popular music. Not because it's technically perfect, because it's emotionally devastating. You can hear Frank's pain in every note, his regret, his longing, his inability to let go. But recording the pain didn't exorcise it. Frank remained obsessed with Ava for the rest of his life. He'd call her, drunk, at 3 a.m., begging her to come back. She'd hang up. He'd call again and again. Sometimes she'd answer. They'd talk for hours, about nothing, about everything, about what went wrong and what could have been. Other times she'd ignore him, change her number, and Frank would find the new one. In 1957, Ava agreed to meet Frank for dinner in Spain. She was living there, dating a bullfighter, trying to move on. Frank flew across the Atlantic for one dinner, one chance. He showed up with flowers, a ring, a proposal. "Marry me again," he said. "We'll do it right this time." Ava laughed, not cruelly, sadly. "Frank, we kill each other. You know that." "I don't care," he said. "I'd rather die with you than live without you." "That's the problem," Ava said. "You mean that?" She sent him home, alone. But she never remarried either. Dated, had affairs. But marriage? No. Later, friends asked why. Ava would shrug. "I already had the love of my life. Why settle for less?" Frank dated too. Married 3 more times. Lauren Bacall, briefly. Mia Farrow, disastrously. Barbara Marx for 22 years until his death. But none of them were Ava, and Frank made sure they knew it. He kept photos of Ava in his wallet, in his dressing rooms, in his homes. When Mia Farrow found them, she demanded he take them down. He refused. Their marriage lasted 2 years. Frank and Ava spoke occasionally until she died in 1990. Ava suffered a stroke, was bedridden, couldn't speak properly, couldn't walk. Her beauty, the thing that defined her in Hollywood's eyes, gone. Frank called her in the hospital. She couldn't respond coherently, but he talked anyway, told her he loved her, that he always loved her, that he never stopped. Ava's nurse later said Ava cried after Frank hung up, squeezed her hand, tried to say something. The nurse leaned close. "Frank," Ava whispered. Those were among her last coherent words. When Ava died on January 25, 1990, Frank didn't go to the funeral. Couldn't. He was 74 years old, frail, depressed, told friends he couldn't bear to see her like that, in a casket, gone forever. But he had her obituary framed, hung it in his house, read it every day. And 8 years later, May 14, 1998, Frank Sinatra lay dying, his children at his bedside, his wife holding his hand, the monitors slowing. Tina, his daughter, later wrote about that moment. She said her father had been mostly silent for hours, barely conscious. But then, in the final minute, he opened his eyes, looked at the ceiling, and with the last breath he had, he whispered one word. Ava. Not Barbara, his wife of 22 years. Not Nancy, the mother of his children. Not any of the hundreds of women he'd loved and left. Ava, always Ava. Because 45 years after their divorce, Frank Sinatra still belonged to the woman who destroyed him. The woman who taught him what real love felt like. The woman who made him feel alive and then tore his heart out. The woman who never left his mind, or his music, or his soul. Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner were together, officially for less than 6 years. 3 years of chaos, 2 years of marriage, 1 year of pretending they could stay friends. But their impact on each other lasted a lifetime. Without Ava, Frank Sinatra would still have been a great singer, but he wouldn't have been the voice of heartbreak, the master of the torch song, the man who made loneliness sound beautiful. Ava gave Frank his pain, and Frank turned that pain into art, into In the Wee Small Hours, into Only the Lonely, into No One Cares, into every 3 a.m. ballad that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world who's ever been left behind. She broke him, but she also made him immortal. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that they couldn't make it work, but that they needed each other's destruction to become who they were meant to be. Frank Sinatra lived 83 years, won Oscars, Grammys, sold over 150 million records, changed American music forever. But on his deathbed, none of that mattered. In the end, there was only one name, one face, one woman, Ava. That's the real story, not the comeback, not the Rat Pack, not the legend. The real story is that Frank Sinatra spent his entire life trying to fill the hole Ava Gardner left, and he never could, because some people don't just break your heart, they take a piece of it with them when they leave. and you spend the rest of your life singing about what used to be there. That's what Ava did to Frank, and that's why, 50 years after they said goodbye, he said her name one last time. Because love like that doesn't die, it haunts.